Apple-style UI animation are everywhere right now. They are clean, minimal, futuristic, and every high-quality brand wants them. If you know how to create this style, you're already one step ahead of most editors. I just spent 5 hours creating this masterpiece of animation, and yes, you can absolutely put it in your portfolio. Client will love it. And in this 40 minutes masterclass, I'm going to teach you exactly how to create it yourself. You will learn how to design and animate in Apple-style UI, create smooth and professional text animations, futuristic interface, and stunning motion graphics. This is everything a modern editor needs to know to stand out in 2025. By the end of this video, you will be ready to deliver works that attract serious clients. Not videos that worth $20, but real project worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Project files are linked below in the description. Let's start by creating a new composition with a white of 90-20 and a high of 1080. Create a white solid. Add a gradient ramp effect, set the start color to bluish grayish, and use the eyedropper to pick the same color and make it darker. Set the start of the ramp at the top and the end of the ramp at the bottom, and change it to radial ramp. Place the background that served as a template, scale it up to 110%, then drag in the image and scale them up to 110% as well. Add a mask to the image and center the anchor points. Now we will start creating the base of the Leonardo AI website. Create a rectangle based on the template, set the roundness to 20, disable the visibility, change its color to match the input file, then re-enable the visibility. Add the inner glow, set the range to 100%, the size to 30, change the color to white and lower the opacity to 20%. Add the image icon, scale it down to 5%, position it, and lower its opacity to 50%. Add the arrow icon, scale it down to 4%, set its rotation to -90 degrees. Position it and lower its opacity to 50%. Create a circle based on the template, disable the visibility, change its color to match the circle in the template, disable the visibility, and move the layer below the arrow layer. Add a text layer and write what you want to see, ... Scale it down to 35%, position it above the template, and lower its opacity to 30%. Now let's move on to the drop-down menu. Create a rectangle based on the template, set the roundness to 10, and add the inner glow to the layer. Set the glow color to white, the range to 100%, the size to 10, and the opacity to 50%. Center the anchor point, disable the visibility so we can align the layers underneath. Duplicate the 3D object layer, bring it above the shape layer, position it, and disable the constraint properties so we can adjust the wide and the height to fit the rectangle template. Copy the comic layer, bring it above the 3D object layer, adjust its wide and height like before to match its template, and move the layer below the 3D object. Add a text layer, type 3D object, position it, and lower its opacity to 50%. Now add a voice assistant video, scale it down to 4%, position it, and apply the linear color key effect. Use the key color tool to select the black area, this will remove it. Using the pen tool, create a straight line in gray. Add the arrow icon, scale it down, position it, and apply the tint effect. Disable the visibility. Use the matte black tool to sample the color from the template. Then re-enable the visibility. Now add a text layer and write "How can I help?" Center the anchor point and position the text. Apply gradient ramp effect, set the start of ramp to the center and the end of ramp to one of the edges. Change it to radial ramp, disable the visibility, set the start color to white, sample the end color from the text border and re-enable the visibility. Add another text layer, write "Welcome to Leonardo AI", center the anchor point, place the text in the template and lower its opacity to 50%. Create a star, set its points to 4, the outer radius to 20 and the inner radius to 80. Center the anchor point, align the star to match the large star in the template and apply gradient ramp effect. Set the start of the ramp to the center the end of ramp to one of the edges and set the start color to light turquoise shade. Add glow effect. Set the glow radius to 88 and glow treasure to 80. Duplicate the layer, scale down the start to match the small star in the template. Delete the glow and change the start color to light shade. Create a lip at half the size of the big star. Adjust its rotation to match the start direction and place the layer between the large star. Add a glow effect. Set the glow treasure to 85 and the glow radius to 40. Add a Gaussian blur. Set the blurriness to 40 and lower the opacity of the layer to 70%. Now let's begin creating the side panel. Start by creating a rounded rectangle in a dark black-blue color that covers the size area of the template. Add a logo and position it in the top corner of the rectangle. Add 3 icons and place them at the center of the rectangle. At the beginning of the rectangle, create a dark gray circle. Add a text layer and write question mark and position it accordingly over the circle. Lastly, let's create a connect wallet button. Start by creating a white square based on the template. Set the roundness to 10 and disable the visibility. Create a new small rectangle, set its roundness to 5, disable the visibility and use the eyedropper tool to sample the color from the template. Add the plus icon, scale it down to 4%, position it accordingly to the template, apply tint effect and set the map black to white. Add a text layer, write connect wallet, center it accordingly to the template, change its color to dark gray, re-enable the visibility on both rectangles and delete the template layer. Now we will move on to build all the animations. We will start by creating entrance animation to the base element. Recompose the large start layer and the glow layer beneath it. Move forward 7 frames, set a position keyframe, then go back to the start and move the start slightly up and to the right. Open the expression box by holding Alt and clicking the stopwatch. Then paste the bounce expression, go back to the previous keyframe and create a position keyframe for the small star. Return to the start, move it slightly up and to the right as well, and paste the same expression. Move forward slightly, set the opacity keyframe for the large star, go back and set the opacity to 0%. Copy the same opacity keyframes to the small star and move the small star's layer to align with the large star's last keyframe. For the text under the stars, go to the animate menu, add opacity, set it to 0%, then create a start keyframe. Half second later, set it to 100%, move forward 7 frames, add position keyframe, go back to the start and move the text slightly downward. Paste the bounce expression and change the AMP value to 0.5. For the text below, go to the animate, add opacity and add a position. Set opacity to 0, create a start keyframe at the beginning of the layer, half second later set it to 100%, at the 1 second mark set position keyframe, then go back to the beginning and move it position slightly downward. In the advanced settings, change the mode to words, move forward 5 frames, create a position keyframe, this time using the original position, not the via animate. Go back to the start of the layer and move the text slightly downward. Paste the expression to the start property and set AMP to 0.5. Paste the expression to the position and set AMP to 0.5. Paste the expression to the position as well and set AMP to 0.5. Enter the graph editor for the first position keyframe and create a sharp downward curve. At the beginning of the layer, create opacity keyframe. Set it to 0%, move forward slightly and set it to 100%. Copy the opacity keyframes and paste them in the second text layer. Shift the second text layer so it starts 3 frames after the first and move both text layers 10 frames forward. Now 7 frames from the start, add scale keyframes to all 3 images, go back to the beginning and reduce their scale to 70%. Paste the expression and set the AMP to 0.1. Copy and paste the same expression to the other 2 image layers. Move slightly forward and set opacity keyframes for all 3 layers. Go back to the starting point, set the opacity to 0%, then drag all the 3 layers 20 frames forward. Now we'll move on to create user connection animation. Add the Mac cursor icon, apply a mask and center the anchor point. Scale down to 10%. Delete the part of the layer before the second one mark and position it near to the top right of the screen. Create a position keyframe, move 2 seconds and move the cursor to touch the connect wallet. Use the pen tool to create point halfway through the motion path. Then use the selection tool to drag the handle sideways and click once on the point. This smooths out the motion. Open the graph editor and connect both graphs into a single smooth curve. At the final position keyframe, create a scale keyframe. Move 4 frames forward, reduce the scale to 2%, then move 4 frames and return it to 10%. Parent all 3 elements above the white rectangle to the white rectangle layer. Create a scale keyframe on the white rectangle, go back to the first keyframe and add one there as well. At the middle of the keyframe, scale up to 120%. Add the bounce expression, set the AMP to 0.1 and the frequency to 1. This creates the click animation for the Connect Wallet bottom. At the start of the Mac cursor layer, create the opacity entrance animation. Now start pre-composing the related layers. First, the 5 layers that make up the input file, then the 7 layers that make up the drop-down menu, then the 7 layers for the side panel, finally the 4 layers that make up the Connect Wallet. Add adjustment layer above the small star layer and apply a Gaussian blur effect. At the middle keyframe of the Mac cursor, we create a blurriness keyframe. We move to the last keyframe and increase the blurriness to 20. We go back to the middle keyframe, trim the path of the adjustment layer that appeared before the keyframe. Add a fast box blur effect to the Connect Wallet comp, create a keyframe for the blur radius, change the iteration to 1 and also create a keyframe for that. Move forward to the final icon, change the iterations to 3 and set the blur radius to 5. This way we create a blur effect on the layers at the moment the Mac cursor clicks on the Connect Wallet. Now we begin to create the Connect Wallet animation. We create a rectangle in the center of the screen with dark gray color, center the anchor point, change the roundness to 30. In the inner glow we change the color to white, the range to 100%, the size to 60 and the opacity to 25%. We lower the layer's opacity to 98%. We create a rectangle in the center of the first rectangle with a color slightly darker than the previous one. Change its roundness to 10, duplicate it, place the duplicate rectangle below it, duplicate it again, and place the new duplicate below the previous one. Add the icons and arrange them so that each one is positioned at the start of its respective rectangle. We add a text and write MetaMask. Scale it down to 40% and place the text near to the icon. We duplicate the text, write Coin-based wallet and position it accordingly with the second icon. We duplicate one last time, write Wallet Connect and move the text down to align with the third icon. We added the arrow icon, change its rotation to -90 degrees, scale it down to 4%, place it on the left side of the rectangle, add the tint effect and change the map black to white. We duplicate the arrow and place it in the rectangle below. We duplicate it again and place it in the last rectangle. We add a text in a light gray color and write the connection terms. Scale it down to 35% and position it above the rectangle. We duplicated the Wallet Connect text layer, move it up, change the text to Connect Wallet, place it above the terms text and scale it up to 65%. Create a white circle outside the top corner of the rectangle, add the plus icon, scale it down to 3%, position it to fit the circle, change its rotation to 45 degrees and lower its opacity to 70%. Now go to the middle scale keyframe of the Mac cursor and parent all the layers that make up the Connect Wallet section and parent it to layer 17, which is the based rectangle. Create a scale keyframe on the based rectangle, move 5 frames forward and create another keyframe. Go back to the first keyframe, scale it down to 70%, paste the expression and change the AMP to 0.1. Move 4 frames forward, parent the plus icon to the white circle, create a scale keyframe on the white circle layer, move 5 frames forward and create another keyframe. Return to the first keyframe and scale it down to 50%. paste the expression and change the AMP to 0.1. Go back to the based rectangle layer, create an opacity keyframe, lower it to 0%, move a bit forward and raise it to 98%. Copy the opacity keyframes and paste them at all other layers that are parent to the based rectangle. On the white circle layer, a few frames after the scale keyframe, create the opacity keyframe. Go back to the first scale keyframe and lower the opacity to 0%. Copy the opacity keyframe and paste it onto the plus icon layer. From layer 3 to layer 17, pre-compose all layers that make up the Connect Wallet section. And also pre-compose the white circle layer and the plus icon layer. Move the Mac cursor to the top layer so it's above everything and no layer covers it. At the scale keyframe, create a position keyframe. Move forward 1 second and position the Mac cursor so it touches the MetaMask. Using the pen tool, create a point in the middle of the path, stretch it for smooth motion, enter the graph editor and connect two curves into one smooth curve. Create a scale keyframe, move 4 frames forward, lower the scale to 4%, move another 4 frames forward and raise the scale back to 12%. At the first scale keyframe on the Mac cursor, go into the pre-comp of the input box, select the first layer that make up the MetaMask and move them so they are aligned. Parent the first 3 layers to their based rectangle, create a scale keyframe on the rectangle, then move to the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor and create another scale keyframe. In the middle of the scale keyframe on the Mac cursor, increase the rectangle scale to 125%. At the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, go into the Connect Wallet comp and add a scanner. Scale it down to 18%, position it at the bottom of the rectangle, trim the layer to start at the current time, and also trim the based rectangle. On the second part of the rectangle, move the anchor point to the bottom. Create a scale keyframe, move 7 frames forward, disable the construct properties, and slightly scale up the right side so the rectangle grows upwards. No expression is needed since it already has one. At the beginning of the second part of the rectangles layer, add position keyframes to the first 2 text layers, and at the rectangle's second keyframe, move the text above the scanner. At the start of the scanner's layer, scale it down to 12% and create a scale keyframe. Move 7 frames forward, scale it back to 18%, paste the expression and set the AMP to 0.1. Go slightly backward and create an opacity keyframe. Then move to the start of the layer and set opacity to 0%. Select all layers related to the MetaMask, Con-based wallet and Wallet Connect. At the first keyframes of the scanner, create opacity keyframes for all of them. Then move to the last keyframe of the scanner and set their opacity to 0%. Add a linear color key effect to the scanner. Use the key color eyedropper to click on the black area of the image. This will make it transparent. In the main comp, add a rectangle with a color slightly darker than the large rectangle. Position it so it has the same width as the main rectangle and a small gap between it. Set the roundness to 10. Add the lighting icon. Place it on the left corner of the rectangle. Apply the gradient ramp effect to it. Set the start of the ramp to the top right corner and the end of the ramp to the bottom left corner. Change the end color to light cyan and the start color to dark cyan. Add text and write connection ... Change its color to white, scale it down to 50% and position it next to the light icon. Apply CC light sweep to the bottom rectangle, set the center to the middle of the rectangle, change the width to 120, lower the sweep intensity to 0 and set the edge thickness to 1. Change the width to 120, lower the sweep intensity to 0 and set the edge thickness to 1. 1 minute before the last keyframes, create a direction keyframe and make the direction complete a full rotation. Go into the graph editor and apply Easy Ease. This creates a loading animation. Parent the lighting icon and the text to the bottom rectangle. At the point when the first direction keyframe was made, create a scale keyframe, reduce it to 60%, move forward 7 frames, and raise it to 100%. Center the anchor point, paste the expression, and change the AMP to 0.1. Go back to the first scale keyframe and create an opacity keyframe. Set it to 0%, move forward slightly, and raise it to 100%. Copy the opacity keyframes and paste them onto the lighting icon and text layers. Create a position keyframe for the circle with the X comp. Move forward 2 seconds, move it up to align with the bottom of the rectangle, and shift the keyframes to be 7 frames from the first keyframe. Paste the expression and set the AMP to 0.1. Pre-compose the bottom rectangle, lighting icon and text into one comp. Parent both circles comp and bottom rectangle comp to the main rectangle comp. At the last direction keyframe, create a scale keyframe for the main rectangle comp. Move forward 7 frames, reduce the scale to 40%, paste the expression, set AMP to 0.1 and frequency to 1. Create the opacity keyframe, move slightly forward and set the opacity to 0%. Copy those opacity keyframes and paste them into the circle comp and the bottom rectangle comp. At the second opacity keyframe start, go into the connect wallet comp, trim the white rectangle, move the anchor point into the right side, create a scale keyframe, move forward 7 frames, turn off the constraint properties and stretch the left side. Duplicate the blue rectangle layer, place the user image above it and set the image trackmate to the duplicate blue rectangle. This ensures the image perfectly fits the square. Trim the layers to start from their point. Move slightly forward, add opacity keyframe to both image and duplicate rectangle layers. Go back to the start of those layers and set the opacity to 0%. On the original blue rectangle, add opacity keyframe, go to the last opacity keyframe of the duplicate layer and set the original opacity to 0%. Copy those opacity keyframes and paste them onto the plus icon layer. Parent the image to the blue square it's linked to, create a position keyframe for the square, move to the left side of the Y rectangle to be 7 frames from the first keyframe. Paste the expression, set the AMP to 0.1 and the frequency to 1. Go to the first position keyframe and on the text layer, create an opacity keyframe. Move slightly forward and set the opacity to 0%. Add a new text layer and write your account. Change the color to black, scale it down and position it in the same location as the previous text. Set its opacity to 0%, create a keyframe, move slightly forward and set opacity to 100%. Add the arrow icon, scale it down and place it in the right corner of the white rectangle. At the point when the new text reaches to 100% opacity, create the opacity keyframe for the arrow. Set it to 0%, move slightly forward and increase it to 100%. Duplicate the white rectangle again, move the duplicated layer above and remove all its keyframes and expression. Change its color to dark blue, add a stroke with light gray color and reduce the stroke width to 0.3. Move the rectangle so it's positioned after the white rectangle. Create a blue circle with the greenish color and place it on the left side of the rectangle. Add lighting icon, position it inside the circle, apply the tint effect to it and change the map black to light blue. At the same point where you previously trimmed the layers, trim both circle and icon layers and delete the earlier parts. Add the text and write 0\10, set the text color to white, scale it down and position it next to the lighting circle. Add another text and write credits used. Change the color to light gray, scale it down and place it next to the previous text. Trim and delete the earlier parts of both text layers. Move a few frames forward and for all 5 layers of the dark blue rectangle, add the opacity keyframes. Return to the beginning of the layers and set the opacity to 0%. My rectangle wasn't moved far enough to the left, so I move it slightly more left. on the first opacity keyframe of the connect wallet comp. For the connect wallet comp of the two small rectangle on the top, create a blur radius keyframe and iteration keyframe. Move forward a few frames and set blur radius to 0 and iteration to 1. Let's go back to the first keyframes. On the adjustment layer, create a keyframe for blurriness. Move forward a bit in the timeline and set the blurriness back to 0. Let's move on to creating the main animation. On the Mac cursor layer, create a position keyframe. Move 1 second forward in the timeline and place the Mac cursor over the text. Using the pen tool, create a keyframe halfway between the two and shift it slightly to the right to create a smooth motion. In the graph editor, merge the two speed curves into one and shape into a rise and fall motion. Add the computer mouse layer above the Mac cursor. In the scale property, shrink it to 5% and apply the tint effect. Change the first color to greenish tone. When the Mac cursor reaches the text input box, cut the Mac cursor layer at the point and delete the part after it. Do the same with the computer mouse layer, cut it at the same point and delete the part before it. Above the last position keyframe of the cursor, create a scale keyframe. Move 4 frames forward, scale it down to 2%. Move another 4 frames forward and scale it back to 5%. Return to the middle keyframe and create opacity keyframe. Then, under the last keyframe, set opacity to 0%. While standing on the first opacity keyframe, go into the text input box pre-comp and create the opacity keyframe on the text layer. In the main comp, move to the last keyframes, go back into the text box pre-comp and set the opacity to 0%. In the main comp, add a text and type 3D model of a cube. Scale it down to 40% and place it above the previous text. Above the last keyframes of the computer mouse, cut and delete the new text layer. Now we will creating text typing animation. I'm going to show you two different ways to do it. Let's start with the first method and I will show you the second later on. We will create a mask around the text. At the beginning of the layer, add a mask path keyframe. Move the mask so that the text is completely hidden. Go 1 frame forward, adjust the mask to reveal only the first letter, copy the keyframe, move 1 frame forward and paste it. Repeat this process for each letter. This animation reveals 1 letter every 2 frames, which create a typing effect. At the end of the typing animation, create the opacity keyframe on the computer mouse layer. Move a bit forward and set the opacity back to 100%. Go back to the first keyframe and create a position keyframe. Move half second forward and position the mouse over the arrow. Using the pen tool, create keyframe in the middle, drag it sideways for a smooth motion. In the graph editor, merge the two curves into a single easy-eased curve. Duplicate the Mac cursor layer, move the new layer to the top and delete all its keyframes. Position the Mac cursor over the first position keyframe of the computer mouse layer. Extend the layer duration slightly and copy the last position keyframes of the computer mouse. Move forward a bit, then cut the layers so that when the computer mouse disappears, the Mac cursor appears. At the last position keyframe, create a scale keyframe, move 4 frames forward, scale it down to 4%, move another 4 and scale it back up to 12%. Go to the first keyframe, enter the text input box comp, link the arrow to the gray circle and create a scale keyframe on it. At the last Mac cursor keyframe, create another scale keyframe and between them scale it up to 120%. This creates the arrow click animation. Add the image of the first cube. In the scale, unlock the construct properties, change the width to 42 and the height to 35. Then re-enable construct properties. Position the image in the center of the screen. Create a rounded rectangle mask on the cube layer, duplicate the layer, add adjustment layer, parent it into the duplicate, apply a Gaussian blur effect on the adjustment layer, and increase the blurriness to 30. On the cube layer, add a CC light sweep effect, set the center to the middle of the image, set the intensity to 0, while to 120, change the light color to light turquoise, and increase the thickness to 6. Above the last keyframe, create a direction keyframe. Move forward 1.5 seconds and change the direction to 50 degrees. Scale the duplicate layer down to 34%. so the light streak moving on the side remains visible. Add a wand icon and position it center on the left side of the picture. Next to it, add a text, write generating, scale the text to 40%, position it centered to the near wand icon and reduce its opacity to 80%. Move to the last keyframe of the Mac cursor for all layers behind the cube, layers 23 to 25 and 17 to 20. Create the opacity keyframe. Move forward 4 frames and reduce the opacity to 0%. Add the tools icon, scale them down to 70% and position them on the bottom of the composition. Create a dark gray square behind the first icon, increase the roundness to 10 and place the square below the icon layer. Duplicate the square, move it 1 layer up and place it below the second icon. Repeat this until every icon has a rounded square background. Add a text with chat response, center the anchor point, scale the text to 30%, position it below the icons and reduce the opacity to 70%. Above the image, add a text and write create a 3D model of a cube. Center the anchor point and scale it down to 65%. Add another text layer with the current time, change the font to regular, color it light gray and position it above the previous text. Also, center the anchor point, scale it to 20%, lower the opacity to 70%. Create a dark gray rectangle around the time text, increase the roundness to 70 and place the rectangle below the time text layer. Add a white stroke with a width of 0.3 to the rectangle. Move both the time text and the rectangle so they are positioned just above the large main text. Parent the text icon adjustment layer and duplicate cube image to the cube image layer. Above the last position keyframe of the Mac cursor, create a scale keyframe for the cube image. Move 7 frames forward and add another scale keyframe. Return to the first scale keyframe and set the scale to 15%. Paste the following expression on the scale property. Set the AMP to 0.1 and the frequency to 1. Set the opacity of the cube image to 0%. Create a keyframe, move forward slightly and set the opacity back to 100%. Copy those opacity keyframes and paste them onto all relate layers. Add the last scale keyframe of the cube image. Parent each icon to the rounded rectangle behind him. At this same point, delete the original icon layers and the rectangle layers behind them. Now let's create the entrance animations for the icons and the text above and below the image. At the start of the layer, for the leftmost square, create a scale keyframe and set it to 0%. Move 7 frames forward and set the scale back to 100%. Paste the expression and adjust the value, MP to 0.1 and frequency to 1. Copy the scale keyframes to the other small square layers. At the start of the leftmost square layer, create the opacity keyframe and set it to 0%. Move forward slightly and set the opacity back to 100%. Copy those opacity keyframes to the layers of the other squares and icons. Select all the squares and icons layers except for the bottommost square and its icon. Shift them 3 frames to the right. Repeat it for each pair of square and icon layers, so that each pair appears one after the another. When the first icon starts to appear, cut and delete the text and the clock layers. Move 7 frames forward and create a position keyframe for the lower text layer. Go back to the start of the layer and move the text slightly downward. Paste the expression and adjust the AMP to 0.2 and the freq to 1. For the second text layer, use the animate button to add the opacity animation. Set the opacity to 0%, create a start keyframe, move half second forward and set the opacity back to 100%. Click the add button and select position. Add a position keyframe and move the text slightly downward. Move to the last scale keyframe and reset the position to 0. In the advanced, change the mode to words. In the graph editor, set the start keyframe to easy ease for smooth motion. Move to the last position keyframe of the first text. Set a position keyframe for the second text. Go back to the start of the layer and move the second text slightly downward. Paste the expression and change the A and P value to 0.5. Parent the time text to the rectangle, move 7 frames forward and create a scale keyframe for the rectangle layer. Return to the start of the layer and reduce the scale to 60%. Paste the expression and change the A and P to 0.1. Move 4 frames forward and create opacity keyframes for all the text layers and the time rectangle. Go back to the start of the layer and reduce the opacity to 0%. Move to the last keyframe of the cube image layer. Above it, create opacity keyframes for linked layers. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0%. Return to the last keyframe and add a thickness keyframe to the image layer. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the thickness to 0. Move to the last keyframe of the duplicate cube image layer. Bring the Mac cursor layer to the top so new layers don't curve it. Create a position keyframe on the cursor layer. Move 2 seconds forward and position the cursor over the leftmost icon of the reply. Using the pen tool, create a keyframe halfway and stretch it slightly. In the graph editor, merge the two graphs into one and shape it with a smooth rise and fall curve. Now let's create the bottom click animation. Return the last keyframe and create a scale keyframe. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the scale to 4%. Move another 4 frames forward and reduce the scale to 12%. At the same point, on the left icon layer, create a scale keyframe. Create another keyframe aligned with the last keyframe of the Mac cursor. Set the middle keyframe scale to 50%. Add a color keyframe, move 4 frames forward and change the color to white. Add a text and write "try again." Scale the text down to 20% and position it above the left icon. Add a dark gray rectangle to cover the text, increase its roundness to 5. Move the rectangle layer below the text layer, parent the text to the dark gray rectangle and center the rectangle's anchor point. Create a scale keyframe for the rectangle, move 7 frames forward and create another keyframe. Return to the first keyframe and reduce the scale to 50%. Paste the expression and set the AMP to 0.1. Create an opacity keyframe, set the opacity to 0%, move slightly forward, then set the opacity back to 100%. Copy those opacity keyframes and paste them onto the text layer. Move to the middle scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, add the second image of the square above the first image, copy the mask from the first image to the second, scale down the second image exactly as the first by copying the scale values. Copy the two position values from the first image to the second to align the size position exactly. Turn both the first and the second image into 3D. On the first image, create a position keyframe, move 1 second forward, move the image right, and 1000 units background in the Z-axis. Create a position keyframe for the second image. Just above the first keyframe, move the image 1700 units backward on the Z-axis. For the first image, add a Z rotation keyframe. Move to the last keyframe and set the rotation to -15 degrees. After the first keyframes, move the image forward so that when it's moved sideways, it's appeared in front. In the graph editor, combine the two graphs into one with an up and down curve to create a smooth, soft bounce effect. Also, for the position of the second image, go into the graph editor and create a fast entry animation. Return to the second position keyframe of the first image and move further back toward 60 area. In the Mac cursor layer, copy the scale keyframes and paste them where you are now. Do the same for the scale keyframes of the square below the icon. Add the third image above the second image. Copy the mask from the second layer to the third. Copy the two scale pyramids from the first image to the third image. Copy the two position pyramids from the second image to the third image. Turn this image into 3D layer. Select the middle keyframe on the Mac cursor. Copy the Z rotation keyframe from the first image to the second image. Create a position keyframe on the second image. Move just after the Z rotation keyframe and position the second image above the first. Below the first Z rotation keyframe, create a Z rotation keyframe on the first image. Move to the last keyframe and set the rotation to -30 degrees. Above the first Z keyframe, create a position keyframe. Return to the last Z keyframe. Move the image backward by scaling it down by half to around 2000 and move it left to match the distance from the second image. At the same point, create a position keyframe for the third image. about its first keyframes, move the image backward by 1700 in the graphs editor, create a fast entrance animation. Move slightly forward, move the second image forward to around -60. Enter the graph editor, connect the graphs and create one graph with sharp ups and downs. Duplicate the first image layer, add a gradient ramp, move to the last keyframes, position the start of the ramp at the top left corner and the end of the ramp at the bottom right corner. Change the duplicated image to multiply above the first keyframes, create opacity keyframe and set it to 0%. Move to the last keyframes and set opacity to 100%. In the graph editor, create a sharp opacity entrance. At the first opacity keyframe, cut and delete the layers before it. Move to the first position keyframe of the second image, cut and delete the layers before it. Move to the first position keyframe of the third image, cut and delete the layer before it. Create a white circle on the left side, add the arrow icon, flip it horizontally, scale it down to 4% and position it on the white circle. Move to the last position keyframe of the third image. Raise the Mac cursor layer above the other layers so the layers don't cover it. Create a position keyframes for the cursor. Move 1 second forward and position the cursor over the arrow. Copy the click animation and place it below the cursor position keyframe. Move slightly backward, almost touch the arrow. Parent the arrow icon to the white circle. At the same point, cut and delete all earlier parts of those layers. Now create entrance animation for the arrow icon and the white circle. Set the opacity to 0% and create an opacity keyframe. Move 4 frames forward and return the opacity to 100%. Below the cursor scale and position keyframes, create a scale keyframe for the white circle. Move 8 frames forward, create another scale keyframe exactly between those two keyframes, reduce the scale to 50%. Paste the expression, reduce the AMP to 0.1 and the frequency to 1. Move to 16 seconds, where the Mac cursor starts moving from the try again icon. Create a color keyframe, then 4 frames forward, return the color to gray using the eyedropper. Move slightly forward, where the Mac cursor almost touched the try again. Create an opacity keyframe for the gray rectangle layer. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0%. Copy the opacity keyframe and paste it to the try again text layer. Now we will create the animation where the images swap and each one moves to the right. At the middle scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, add the Z rotation and position keyframes to all 3 images. Move 22 frames forward, since the previous moves were separate 22 frames apart. Change the Z rotation of the first image to -15 degrees. Copy the position values from the second image. Set the Z rotation of the second image to 0 degrees, copy the position values from the third image to the second image, set the Z rotation of the third image to 15 degrees, move the third image right and backward by 1000 so it aligns to the first image. Select the last keyframes of all 3 images and create a shape up and down curve in the graph editor. Copy the keyframes from the first image to its duplicate layer with the gradient ramp. Add the opacity keyframe, move half second forward, reduce the opacity to 0%. At the end of the move animation, add a position keyframe to the Mac cursor. Move half second forward and position the cursor at the center of the currently active image. Add the scale keyframe, 4 frames later, reduce the scale to 8%. When the Mac cursor is not longer touching the white circle with the arrow, create the opacity keyframe for both circle and arrow. 4 frames later, reduce the opacity to 0% so the bottom disappears as the cursor moves away. Move to the last position keyframe of the Mac cursor, duplicate the second image, move it above and delete all its keyframes. Create a scale and Z rotation keyframes for it, set opacity to 0% and create the opacity keyframe. Move 4 frames forward, return opacity to 100%, change the Z rotation to -10 degrees and reduce the scale to 30%. Add a new shape layer, set the rotation to -10 degrees, draw a dark gray rectangle exactly covering the image, increase the roundness to 5 and center the anchor point. Duplicate the rectangle, remove the fill from the duplicate and add a white stroke with a size of 2. Add the dashes under the stroke to create a dashes border. Reduce the opacity of both layers to 50%. Position both layers to the left side of the text box. On the top rectangle, draw a white circle, add the plus icon, scale it to 3% and position it on the white circle. Move the layers of the rectangle, circle and the plus icon below the Mac cursor layer. Move the last position keyframe of the Mac cursor, turn the plus icon, the circle and the dash rectangle to the dark rectangle. Create a scale keyframe, reduce the scale to 0%, then 4 frames forward, increase the scale back to 100%. Paste the scale expression and reduce the AMP to 0.04. Move the duplicate second image below the cursor layer and parent it to the Mac cursor, so when the Mac cursor moves, the image moves with it. Create a position keyframe for the Mac cursor, move 1.5 seconds forward and drag the Mac cursor above the shape we created, so the image fits perfectly inside the template. In the middle of the movement, create a keyframe with a pen tool and slightly stretch it to the right to create a smooth motion. In the graph editor, connect the two graphs into one with the easy in and easy out curve. Add the Mac cursor's last keyframe, split it into 2 layers. For the top Mac cursor layer, create a scale keyframe, move 5 frames forward and increase the scale to 12%. Return to the first keyframe of the plus icon, white circle, dashes frame, and dark rectangle layer and create opacity keyframes. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0%, so the template disappears as the image reaches it. Move to the Mac cursor last keyframe, create a position keyframe, move 1 second forward and place the Mac cursor on the text. Scroll down, duplicate the computer cursor and place the duplicate exactly above the Mac cursor. Delete all keyframes of the computer cursor layer. Place it on the Mac cursor and parent it to the Mac cursor layer so it moves exactly with the Mac cursor. When the Mac cursor touches the text box, cut and delete the left side of the computer cursor layer so it doesn't appear before. At the same point, create an opacity keyframe for the Mac cursor, move a few frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0% so that when the computer cursor appears, the Mac cursor disappears. Above the last position keyframe of the Mac cursor, create a scale keyframe for the computer cursor. Move 4 frames forward, reduce the scale to 20%, move 4 more frames forward and reduce the scale to the original size. At the middle scale keyframe, create opacity keyframe, move 4 frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0% so the computer cursor disappears on the click. At the first scale keyframe of the computer cursor, create an opacity keyframe for the text layer, move to the middle scale keyframe of the computer cursor and reduce the text layer's opacity to 0% so the text disappears on the click. Add a new text to appear inside, write make it in dark theme, scale it to 40% and position it above the previous text. At the last keyframes of the computer cursor, cut and delete the left side of the new text so it appears exactly when the text cursor disappears. Now, as I promised, I will show you another way to create text typing animation. This method is very simple. Add the typewriting effect to the text, move 1 second forward and drag the last keyframe there. And basically that's it. Scale the computer cursor layer. Below the first start keyframe of the new text, create a position keyframe for the Mac cursor layer. Move 1 second forward and position it on the send button. Move back to the first start keyframe. Below it, create an opacity keyframe for the computer cursor layer. Move 2 frames forward, increase the opacity to 100% so the computer cursor appears exactly at the end of the text animation. When the computer cursor touches the send button, cut and delete the layer after it. Create an opacity keyframe for the Mac cursor layer, move 2 frames forward and increase the opacity to 100%. Now let's create the click animation for the send button. Move slightly forward to the moment when the Mac cursor is over the send button. Create a scale keyframe, move 4 frames forward and scale down to 4%. Then move another frames forward and scale back up to 12%. Go back to the first scale keyframe, enter the text box comp. For the circle of the send button, create a scale keyframe, reduce to the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, create another scale keyframe for the circle, and in between increase the scale to 120%. Go back to the middle scale keyframe of the cursor. For the second duplicate cube image, the one next to the text box, add a opacity keyframe. Move 4 frames forward and reduce the opacity to 0%. Duplicate the first cube image, turn the adjustment layer in the first image below with a blur effect to the duplicated first image. Select all layers of the icons with square below them, the time text, its rectangle, and the two other texts that appear in the center of the screen above and below the image, the adjustment layer, the duplicated first image, which the adjustment layer appeared to it, the third image, the second image, and the two additional duplicated of the first image. Move them so they are stuck on top of each other, then recompose all of them. Move to the first opacity keyframes of the generate text and the magic wand icon. Cut and delete the part of the first image layer that comes after those keyframes. Below the middle scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, create a position keyframe for the comp of the animation base. Move half second forward, move them upward until they are out of visibility frame, and in the graph editor create a sharp exit motion. Enter the animation based comp, copy all the layers, paste them in the main comp and pre-compose them. Move to the first position keyframe of the comp, cut and delete the earlier part of the new comp before the keyframe. Move slightly forward, enter the new comp, delete the first two images and the second image. Add the dark cube image above the second image. Copy the mask from the second image and paste it onto the dark cube. Also, copy the scale values from the second cube and paste them to the dark cube. Then copy the position values from the second image and paste them onto the dark cube. So the dark cube will be exactly in the same size and position as image 2. Delete the first cube and the adjustment layer. Above the image, change the text to make it in a dark theme. Delete the exiting position keyframes and move the text slightly to the right so it sits directly above the image. Also, update the clock time to a few minutes later. Next, copy the small image of the second cube, the one near to the text box, and paste it into the current comp. Scale it down to 20% and move it to the top right corner of the dark cube image. Now draw a white circle in the bottom right corner of the small image, add the arrow icon, scale it down to 2% and place it over the white circle. Move to the last position keyframe of the original comp. On the duplicate comp, create position keyframe, then go back to the start of the layer and move the comp downward out of the visibility area. Open the graph editor and create a sharp easy in motion. Add a scale keyframe, set it to 60%. Move forward 7 frames and scale back to 100%. Paste the expression and set the AMP to 0.03. Finally, move the comp below all other layers so when it enters, it doesn't appear on top of them. Now, convert all layers except for the solid layer to 3D layers. Add a one node camera. Go to the middle scale keyframe of the computer cursor, create a position keyframe for the camera, move 1 second forward and zoom the camera in toward the text box so the box fills almost the entire screen. Move forward in time, at the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, create another position keyframe for the camera, move 1 second forward, go back to the first position keyframe and paste it here to return to the default full screen view. Go to the first scale keyframe of the Mac cursor and zoom the camera slightly to emphasize the icons below the image. Then move 1 second forward, copy the previous position keyframe, which is for a full screen view, and paste it at your current position. At the 3 scale keyframe of the mouse cursor, create a position keyframe, move 1 second forward, copy the full screen position keyframe and paste it. Now move to the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor and create a position keyframe for the camera. Move forward 1 second and adjust the camera so it centers on the middle image. Go back to the 3rd scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, create another position keyframe, move 1 second forward and return the camera to a full screen. Move to the last scale keyframe of the computer cursor, create a position keyframe for the camera, move 1 second forward and zoom in on the text box. For the last time, move to the last scale keyframe of the Mac cursor, create a position keyframe, move 1 second forward and zoom the camera back out to full screen. Now go into the graph editor for all the camera's position keyframes and apply sharp easy in that is a fast entry motion. Then final step, trim the composition to the end at the last position keyframe of the camera. Alright, that's it for today's tutorial. Now you know how to create stunning Apple-style UI animation that stand out. Here is the final animation once again. Make sure to add this animation to your portfolio. Every client will be impressed by it. Project files are available in the description below to help you follow along the practice. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more advanced tutorials like this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.